Welcome back to Creative Culture. My name is Steve, and this is a podcast about creative people, how they help shape our culture, and how the world is a better place because of them. If you enjoy these conversations, please consider supporting the show by pitching in a little over at patreon.com/creativeculturepod. Also, please rate this podcast or leave a review over on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or even on my website over at creativeculturepod.com. Finally, if you're watching the video version on YouTube, please leave a comment and let me know what you think about this episode. I have always been intrigued by the beauty and intricate artwork on tarot cards, which come in an endless variety of styles and aesthetics. But it's only recently that I began to understand and appreciate the art of tarot reading, which is much deeper and more nuanced. Let me put it in woodworking terms. That's what everybody was asking for. It's like having an appreciation for the beauty of hand planes. There's guys who collect hand planes. But then realizing that the true art is expressed by the person who uses those tools to add beauty to the world. How's that for a metaphor, Madison?
Yeah, that's great.
One way we can define art is creating something which is valued for its beauty, emotional power, or conceptual ideas. And tarot fits this description nicely. If you've never really given much thought about tarot, or maybe you have a knee-jerk or even a cynical reaction to tarot, take a moment to consider the beauty and meaning it brings to people's lives. You don't have to believe in something to understand and appreciate its relevance in culture for hundreds of years. Madison, known online as EsoTarot, has become a notable presence in the online tarot community. She started her YouTube channel in January of 2020 and has built her own community of nearly 400,000 subscribers with 51 million views. That's some pretty amazing growth in a short time.
That's crazy. I didn't even know that.
You got to come here to get the stats.
Yeah.
Her videos are long. She just posted one yesterday that's 6.5 hours long.
A bit of a magnum opus.
She reads tarot cards to help viewers better understand and reflect their own life challenges, desires, careers, passions, and loves. They are upbeat and positive, and Madison is an expert at communicating the meanings of the cards and what insight we can gain from them. I had the honor of meeting with Madison last week for a personal tarot reading, and it was an enlightening and fun experience. And I can tell you without hesitation that she is highly intuitive, empathetic, confident, and really good at her craft. This is going to be fun. Hey, Madison, welcome to the show. It's great to see you again.
Hi, thank you so much. That was so kind of you, and it was so lovely to read for you. And yeah, thank you for having me.
It was a unique experience for me. It felt like it's a tarot reading is kind of a shared experience. Really, it's not just a one-way kind of thing. I thought it was real interesting.
Absolutely, it's a conversation, and it's not something that I think is most effective when you just sit there and have someone talk at you, which is quite literally what my videos are. But I feel like even if, you can't directly respond, the human connection is still there. And I think that's what's important, is the purpose behind why you're doing the reading in the first place. And, you're dealing with intense topics sometimes, and you never know what's going to come through. And so it's very important that, you trust who is giving you that reading, and they're coming from a place of compassion rather than, judgment and something like that.
How would you describe tarot in general and a tarot reading? How does this all proceed?
I would describe tarot cards as one card stock and a tool, but what the tool is archetypal images of the human experience. And you can use those cards for so many different purposes. Some people use them for uplifting purposes. Some people use them for nefarious purposes. It's a tool, and ultimately you can do whatever you want with it. I would say tarot readings are a bit different. My understanding of tarot readings has evolved even just as I've evolved as a reader. I think what maybe makes my readings, I wouldn't say, I guess, different from others is I understand myself as a medium, as a spirit medium. And so tarot is really the tool that allows me to get out of my linear mind, kind of put it in the back seat and allow something much more intelligent, um, super unconditionally loving and powerful use my voice and my brain to give messages to people that need them. And it's a pretty weird, like, concept to even conceptualize, and it's something that I didn't even realize I was doing for a long time. Um, I've come to understand a lot of my reading process in hindsight and reflection, but you don't need to be a medium to read tarot cards. A lot of people aren't. Um, Anyone can read tarot cards, and I think that everyone can benefit from using tarot just because it is for humans. If you're a human person, you can use tarot cards. It's, one of those things where it's not about the cards themselves, it's about what you're putting into it and what you're getting out of it that matters. So if it's not helping you, don't do it, but if it can, like, it's definitely great to at least explore and try.
And how could you use tarot as a tool for maybe your own intuition?
Well, I read for yourself. I That's how I started. I was in college and I was studying psychology, and I didn't really have a way to get in touch with myself. And I was just really desperate to find a way to connect with myself in a way that, actually made sense for me. I think there's not very many opportunities in our everyday society to really reflect externally. And I think the cool thing about tarot is that it really takes what's going on internally and it helps you see it in picture form and meanings. And when you're able to see a lot of internal issues outside of yourself, it's easier to come up with solutions. It's easier to look at things differently. I think it's also a powerful way for us to check our own biases and look at, our perception of the world. And is it something that's contributing to our happiness or not? There's so many ways that you can use it. It's really kind of endless, but um, it is really cool because everyone puts their own spin and finds their own magic with it.
It's really interesting. You said you were studying psychology because I definitely see some comparisons between psychology and tarot reading. Do you kind of see yourself as a therapist in a way? Because I kind of got that feeling from the reading that you did for me, that there was a lot of overlap.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think I get comments a lot that people are like, this is better than my
Yeah.
therapist or like something like that, which I'm like, I'm not a replacement for a therapist. Therapy is great. Please go to therapy. Like, don't get rid of that. But I was already studying that stuff anyway. My plan was to get my PhD in clinical psychology, and my channel took off while I was taking a gap year, and you know, doing something that made me so happy and allowed me to help people without having, a degree. I think it's wonderful to help people with a degree, but this was a tangible way for me to help people now. And that's why I got into psychology and all of that in the first place. But, I think tarot itself is really, it's a conversation with the psyche. And, there are a lot of, uh, popular figures in psychology that, their work is often referenced in things like decks. Carl Jung, Joseph Campbell are like two really big ones that I can think of off the top of my head. But, even the study of psychology itself is still very much in its infancy. And I think as humans, our scientific method itself, is based on what we can observe, what we can replicate, what we can agree upon. And I think that a lot of our human experience is subjective and is very personal. And it's kind of hard to put things like tarot in these rigid, scientific terms, at least the way that they're fleshed out right now. Um, but I think more than anything, like there is a lot of overlap, and I think it actually can be a very fascinating tool. I wouldn't be shocked if there are therapists out there that use them or, suggest that their clients use them, because not only is tarot really helpful, but I use a lot of oracle decks, which, the only difference is that tarot has a specific structure to it, kind of like a deck of cards would. And oracle decks can have literally anything in them. So you can just have guidance in them. You can have really very interesting, deep, complex topics in these decks. And they're really just a powerful way for you to work with yourself outside of yourself. And a lot of times it can be very hard to work with yourself on your own, especially since so many of us are still learning how to have even just like positive relationships with ourselves. And so it's a really cool way of like putting the power in your own hands and, finding ways to connect with yourself and not necessarily needing an outside person to facilitate that. Not that that should be gotten rid of,
Yeah.
but, obviously accessibility to those resources is varied. So, tarot is a powerful way, and decks like that are a powerful way to get in touch with yourself on a personal level. So,
Do you find that that's a different experience reading for yourself as opposed to reading for somebody else? Because, you mentioned having to be very observant of somebody that you're reading with, and I definitely picked up on that. You're very keyed in, just like a psychologist is, on what a person is saying and listening very closely. How does that compare to listening to yourself?
well, I think it's harder because it's just harder to be objective about your own self. That
Sure.
it's hard to be objective in general. I think it is impossible to be entirely objective. But I think when it comes to your own stuff, like I can sit down and have like a very basic spread and I'll be like, I don't know what this means. And it's not because I don't necessarily don't know what it means. It's just it doesn't flow the same. So for myself, I typically use a lot of the resources that come with decks. I also try to be very structured with readings I do for myself so there isn't room for me to like project or miss something. I also try not to read for myself all the time. Like it's something where because it is my job, I find that it's not my first inkling to like go do a reading for myself. I'm usually too tired. But I find that like the gift tarot has given me is access to my spiritual side and to discover a lot more of that. And I find that the cards are a middleman. And I find that I usually only need to go to the cards when I need to confirm something that I've already been intuiting on my own. I think that they're very powerful in that form, but it's definitely hard using them as a personal guide sometimes. So I'll send it to like to my friends and be like, okay, what do you think? Do you think I was interpreting that like the right way? But more than anything, I think it's a trust thing. Like you just kind of have to trust that if there's something you need to know, you're going to know it. And if you don't, well, you'll figure it out eventually.
When did you first discover tarot cards? Was that while you were in college, or were you already using those before?
Well, I had, like, a run-in with them, I think when I was in high school. My friend had a deck, and she was learning how to do it, and I remembered, just in hindsight, like, that what she had said in that reading was true, and one day I was on YouTube as I have been since I was young,
As we all
and
are.
I saw a tarot card reading pop up, and I was like, "This is gonna be bullshit." So I clicked on it, and I was very shocked to realize that it was not, and I was very weirded out, and at that point in my life, my understanding of the world, like, I didn't really believe in much, I wasn't really connected to the outside world, I was very cynical, I was very negative, and, you know, um, and I didn't really have a way to tap into that. There's just a lot of anger, like, at the world because of that, and, and what you were talking about earlier with that skepticism and that, like, scoffing at it, I think that's a very natural and very normal thing because, we usually push away what we don't understand, and it's silly to think that like a couple of cards could read you to filth, but they absolutely can. And I think, the coolest thing is that when you open yourself up, to these things that you scoff at or that you don't understand, you open yourself up into an entirely new world of possibilities, of perceptions, of ways of
It's
looking
pretty
at the
amazing.
world. It is, it's incredible. And I think it's one of those things where you only get out what you put into it. The more open-minded you can be, like the more you can realize just how powerful your perspective is and how powerful that that minute judgment can like make or break shifts in your life and changes. And yeah, it's a cool thing.
Do you meet people who have had that same experience of starting out very skeptical, even cynical, to the point where, they just would automatically shut down any kind of talk of tarot, but then have suddenly had that, all it takes is just to observe, just to see exactly what's happening in a tarot reading to kind of understand and to be able to let that in.
Yeah, I think that one thing that I would like to give humanity credit for is that I think most people are far more open-minded than
Yeah.
we give them credit for. I think the biggest thing is that people are usually just afraid that it's going to be negative. And I think that that is very telling of where we are at as a society and where the average person is,
Like you're going to
in
read a
a
card
given
and
day.
say, you're going to get
Yeah,
hit
it's
by
going
a
to be
bus tomorrow. You're
yeah,
going to die.
exactly. Like it's like, oh yeah, doom and gloom. Like and that's
Yeah.
almost never the case. And the thing is that there is no such thing as, a negative reading. Like if there's a tough message that needs to come out, you can still have a positive resolution. And oftentimes it is facing those things that brings about a lot more joy and a lot more positivity in your life. But I think, the people that are usually like resistant to it often are not even open-minded enough to explore it, whether that's from a
Right.
place of fear or arrogance. It doesn't really matter, but like ultimately they're cheating themselves and
Yeah.
they're missing out, but that's okay. That's their choice and
Maybe we'll
that's their right.
change a few opinions with this podcast. Who knows?
I hope so.
What do you think are like the most common misconceptions about tarot?
That's actually like a really good question because there's, well, it depends on what camp you're coming from. Because if you're coming from a religious camp, it's likely you think I'm a scammer, you think I'm a
I
sin
think that that's a
against
big
God.
one, and I think that
Yeah,
that's a big one to put aside, is that it's a scam, um,
which
because I
there are
mean,
so many scams that like people buy
yeah,
into like the IRS. Like, are you kidding me? Like, I think that
yes,
there are a lot of
exactly,
things that people actively buy into that are just objectively scams. And I think that it's kind of funny because it's like, yeah, you don't see that as a scam because it's normalized and
right,
accepted, but the real problem is that there are scammers that take
right.
my likeness and
Oh yeah,
and
I've seen those
my
all over
image.
Instagram, and yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
true.
so it's kind of funny because there I am a scammer in the sense that the people that take my likeness, absolutely do, try to scam people using my image and my name, which I, try
But
to
I think that
warn
that's
people
like the
against.
kind of a default setting for a lot of people, thinking that most people or all tarot readers, astrologists are scammers, and that they're going into it with this idea of, I can just make a quick buck doing this. And
Yeah.
my experience has really been the opposite. Nobody devotes their life to something if they really want to make if they're really trying to scam people and they're just trying to make a quick buck off of it. It just really doesn't work that way.
And I think that's why positive representation of these, outlets are so important because that is what a lot of people jump to. And I think that there also are like prejudices that people have, there are certain stereotypes around like the types of person that does this sort of thing. And I think that there's a lot of unconscious bias. And then I also think that there's like two big camps. There's the religious camp that has been taught that it's evil, and
You're
there is
Satan.
yes, that I
You're
literally someone told me yesterday, like, "I am doomed." The Father told me, he wants me to
you're,
let you know you're doomed. I'm like,
you're
"Okay,
going
thank
to
you."
hell.
Well, I
Yeah.
I talked to the Father, he said I'm fine and that you should find a better hobby, but
All the cool people are in hell. So
I mean, I the other camp that I think is actually more frustrating because, like, here's the thing with, like, the religious camp, at least they believe in something. I feel like with the, agnostic atheist camp, there's a lot of, like, I don't want to believe that there could be something more. I think partially because a lot of people that end up in that camp, have experienced religious trauma or abuse through religion and have not had access to their spiritual side. But I think there is this almost arrogance of like, oh, you must be stupid if you believe in this. You must
exactly.
be like,
Right.
and I think that really just goes to like, it's such a mirror because if you're
Mhm.
not questioning and going, why are people so interested in this? And you're just automatically assuming that if someone is interested in it, then they are stupid. I think that says a lot about the person making that judgment, less so than the person, just minding their own business, reading their cards.
Yeah, yeah, totally. What other kinds of misconceptions? I would imagine like a big one is that you're like a fortune teller, and I don't see that as the case at all.
Well, yeah, I mean, even when we did your reading, I
Right.
one of the first things I told you was, we can look at the future, but when you're looking at the future, you are looking at what is most likely going to happen based on the present moment. The
Hmm.
future can always shift and always change, and it's based on our actions in the present. So oftentimes, future readings are not necessarily the most helpful. I actually stopped doing prediction readings because my predictions would be, listen, this is the energy that you're coming into this month. Here's how you might want to approach it. Here's what could happen. And I would have people get upset with me because I wouldn't say like specific things are going to happen. And it's like, well, it's a general reading. What? Your Aunt Gladys is gonna come bring you cookies? Like, that's not a real like that.
Cookies.
I think what people don't realize is that, a lot of underlying energies that we all experience are expressed in different semantics. And so the
Yeah.
power of these collective readings is that you can get to the core energies and you just have to understand how it applies to you. And I think, for a lot of people, they do have this idea that like I'm not here to I'm here to tell you what you want to hear. I'm here to, sell you this vision on this amazing, incredible life that you're going to have in your future and not tell you how to get there, how to do it. And I think the
Right.
thing is a lot of the scammy type people are people who are, let me tell you about your future. Let me tell you about this. And they kind of, pull people in on this like emotional, this like idea of pathos and, people's
Hmm.
dreams. They exploit people's dreams and it is wrong. You shouldn't do that. But, most people I have found use this to look at what has already happened or what is currently happening and reflect on it, grow from it, learn from it, integrate the wisdom from it so that when you're moving forward and when you're taking action in your present, you can move towards a future that you actually want to see in life rather than continuing to reenact old wounds or old ways of being that don't align with you anymore. It's
Right. That's kind of what I was picking up on, is that it's just like psychology. It's mostly a tool for self-reflection, and it gives you a way to maybe look at yourself and parts of your life that you hadn't considered, or it's just somebody out there who's kind of letting you see this in ways that you hadn't before.
Yeah, well, and I think in a lot of circumstances, people don't realize how interconnected aspects of their life are. And I think that when you actually start, I think that, not everybody self reflects. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but, it could be that they were never taught or they simply don't know how to. And a lot of people just aren't given the tools to help themselves grow or even know that they can change or that they can grow. There's a lot of messaging in our mass consciousness around, things being hopeless and, us not being able to change and us being stuck and chained to, what causes us suffering and pain. And, whether there's validity to that or not, it's a very dominant perspective. And I think that it causes a lot of people to be stuck in the prisons of their own minds and belief systems. And I've just found that tarot is a powerful key to getting out of that should you want to. And if you don't, that's fine. But if you do, explore it. You never know where it might
And
lead
it
you.
and it really does come down to the card reader
Hmm.
themselves, because like you said, it's just a tool, and I think that could vary from reader to reader, and I think that's important to know.
Absolutely.
How
People
do you
can use this to exploit people. It
Yeah.
happens. It's sad, but it does happen.
So describe a typical, I don't even know if there is a typical personal reading with somebody. If you were to if somebody was to come to you like I did and sit
Mhm.
down and have a spread everything, kind of describe that process and how it might play out. What would a person expect from it who's never done that before?
I guess and this is where this is definitely, I can't speak for any other reader, but if I'm reading for you, the first thing that I'm going to want to know is why do you want this reading?
Mm.
And oftentimes people will come with a general idea, and it's very rare that I think people usually come out and just say like what they actually want to know about, or they may not even know what kinds of questions to ask or things like that. So I just kind of try to get a baseline of where someone is at and like
Yeah,
kind
you
of
did a pretty
where
good job of that with me because I didn't really know what to expect from the reading, and you just managed to ask a couple of questions, and it was we were instantly able to kind of zero in on a topic that we covered, and it was really well done the way you did that.
Thanks. Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's normal. Like go in with the assumption that if someone is coming in, like I'm gonna assume that you probably know less, that you're probably like out of your depth. So I never come in. I usually don't take what people's first like question is. And to be fair, I don't do a lot of like one-on-one readings
Right.
anymore because a lot of them are. So
Well,
when I
it's
am
because you're
reading for
making those
people,
6-hour videos.
yeah, I'm like, guys, like how can I be this scammer soliciting you? Like I can't even text my friends back. Like I'm busy.
All right.
But when I am, reading one-on-one with someone, it is a lot easier for me to pinpoint like what's going on energetically.
Yeah. What are like the most common questions people would ask?
Well, I think a lot of common questions, like people want to know about their future. Like, and I think that that's partially because that's how we've understood these cards to be used.
Hmm.
And that's a very common
That's
way.
what we see
And
in the movies.
yeah, well, yeah, there's a lot of really bad tarot
Oh, you
representation
got
out
the
there.
death card. It means you're going to die.
Yes, yes, like all the doom and gloom
Yeah. This. Yeah.
and yeah, so, I feel like a lot of times I try to pinpoint what's going on underneath the question because really we can sit down and I can give you a reading and I can leave you no better off than you were if I go off of maybe what you're saying or if I just go off of what you think you want. And that's not to say that people never know what they want, but I find that oftentimes there's more effective ways at looking at a problem or looking at a question and getting better answers. Like, for example, if you're asking, like, will I get this job at XYZ place? Instead of asking if you're going to get it, maybe we should ask, how can you be most prepared for this job? What are your intentions with looking at this job in the first place? Are there any potential pitfalls of this job that you may need to be aware of? Like, I think that oftentimes it's less about, what is going to happen, but
Yeah.
rather how can you approach a situation with the most preparedness possible and also make sure that you're even taking action that's in alignment with what you actually want. So often we move towards these things and go towards these pathways in life that don't actually resonate with who we are, but we're just doing what we think we should be doing and what we're taught we're supposed to want. And so, yeah, I think more than anything, like a lot of questions have to do with like other people or things like that. And what I try to do, because it can be useful to look at other energies and it can be useful to look at what might happen. But I think that oftentimes there is some underlying thing that we can look at that is more constructive and gives people more confidence to be prepared for
Right.
whatever they face.
And how would that play out in a reading? Okay, so you've got this basic framework of a question. We could use the job question as an example. And so then you're doing the layout of cards, and is that different from reader to reader? And then how then do you interpret those particular cards in a spread to apply to this question?
So this for me personally, this comes down to mediumship. The only time that I use spreads in my readings are if I need specificity anywhere. A lot of times I will just want to like shuffle and see how things flow.
So what you
Like,
did with me was a spread, wasn't it? Because you had like eight
so it kind
cards
of
and
was. We did the second shuffle
second,
I did was the
right?
spread. The first thing I did was I
You were
just
just,
shuffled cards to look at your energy and
it's
see
like
what's
rapid
actually going
fire.
on.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I was like, okay, I see what you're asking, but it's not. I guess one way I can communicate my experience, especially with personal readings, is I can feel if we're hitting the core of what needs to be talked about or not.
And that's
And
your
if we're
intuition.
not, yeah, and that's an intuitive thing. And so then I might start pulling cards to see what's going on just first and foremost, and then, see how that resonates. And then, so like in your case, we looked at two pathways. So
Hmm.
that might be a spread that I would do, but that was just more broadly like, okay, let me shuffle these cards for choice A and let me shuffle these cards for choice B. And here's what will likely happen here. You can do so much with it, and there is no standard, especially no standard personal reading. I think my general readings, there has become a more standard format, but
Mhm.
like even that I resent and want to change. So I probably
Right.
will.
Well, that's
But
good that
like,
tarot is open to that because I know there is a structure to it, and yet it seems like there's a lot of flexibility in how it's practiced.
oh yeah. And I think even to like tarot itself, even though there is so much within it, it still is there are still limits to it. So that's why I like adding things like oracle cards and, you know, extra things that can add to the reading. Um, but it is one of those things where it's unique every time, and it depends heavily on the person's energy and what I
Yeah.
intuitively feel called to, and it
Because
really is
there's so many cards. There's what, 70, how many cards in it?
78.
78. And so and
Mhm.
plus, so you've got those cards, you've got the meaning, you have to know the meaning of all of these cards or how each card might be interpreted in a given situation. But then you also have the reversals depending on if they're right side up or upside down, the opposite way. So you're basically doubling that
Mhm.
amount of what you have to know. Is that how long of a process was this for you to learn and just to know all of these cards and all of their meanings?
So I just took to it very quickly. I have a photographic memory and I have synesthesia, and I think that that
Oh.
actually helps me with the memorization process. But I also, it, I don't think I'm a good reference point of how long that takes, because I think it depends on, how people memorize things, how people, I just took to it very naturally. And honestly, I would say like, I'm not even that good at recalling like all the meanings of something off the top of my head. Like
Mhm.
one thing that I've learned through this process of tarot is that sometimes it's less important of what the card itself means and rather how am I going to interpret it? Because one thing that I find is that the universe will give you the cards that you need to give the message that needs to get out there. And there are often multiple cards and multiple combinations that can have the same meanings. You know, the 3 of cups and the sun are both cards of joy, of happiness, but one is maybe more specific, the 3 of cups being, uh it's not as major, it's not a major card. It's not, it's a minor card, and it's about emotional fulfillment, it's about connection and community, whereas the sun is just overall joy, light, but they still kind of have that underlying
Yeah.
vibe. That may not be the best example, but there's a lot of different meanings that can come through, and I find that, you don't even need to have every single thing memorized. You don't need to have everything understood. I mean, you should understand the basic premise of it, otherwise it's
Well,
probably
and
gonna
the
be hard to
artwork
read.
itself sort of kind of helps with that because there's a lot going
Exactly.
on each card.
Absolutely. There's a lot going on, and what I find is that especially just in what I'm doing, I can't speak for other people, but I find that whatever I need to understand or whatever needs to come through is going to come through. And if there's a certain meaning that I don't pick up on, it's probably because it wasn't relevant. But that's the thing with these cards is that, there are these standardized meanings, but they can also come through with like very interesting and unique interpretations sometimes where it would not work in a traditional reading, like, maybe for a bunch of people, but for a specific person, it's going to make sense. Or in this instance, it's going to make sense. So I find that like it's great to have a baseline and a general understanding of the meanings of the cards, but to not be so rigid in that stance because you
Mhm.
never know how the cards could convey a unique message that you wouldn't necessarily find in a tarot book, but works for that circumstance. So I think it's a great combination of intuition and studying the
Yeah.
structures.
It's got to be kind of fun also for each individual person to have just a totally different experience and to be a part of that.
Absolutely, and I think that's the cool thing is tarot's really a mirror,
Mm.
and it's about who's looking into it and what they see.
Do you have a favorite card? Anything that speaks to you?
The 6 of Cups, it's the
Really?
first, yes, it's the first card I ever drew, and it's, just a very sweet card, and, like, tarot for me has been a huge, like, coming home to myself energy and reconnection to myself, and the 6 of Cups represents things like that. It represents nostalgia, it represents, like, very sweet, sweet feelings, and yeah, it's my favorite card.
Oh, really? Oh, that's interesting. So what is there there seems to be a connection also to with tarot to astrology. Is that can you speak to that a little? Because I know that I mean, astrology has been around for thousands of years. Tarot, I was looking this up, goes back about 600 years or so. Tarot itself is pretty old,
Yeah.
but nowhere near as old as astrology. But I noticed that people who are tarot readers are usually kind of cross-pollinated with astrologers. They're the one and the same in a lot of cases.
Well, this is, yeah. So in the tarot decks themselves, there are connections to astrology. Like, for example, if you start with the Emperor is ruled by Aries, the Hierophant's ruled by Taurus, the Lovers is ruled by Gemini. So you've got those overarching energies. And then, you've got all the court cards that represent, fire, air, earth, water. So you can say, oh, this could be an earth sign person, or, this person has very fiery qualities. And even actually every single card in tarot has a specific placement. There are certain books about that, but astrology is such a fascinating and dense topic that you can make connections to it in tarot, but it's really its own separate thing. And I do think that some of that cross-pollination is kind of like our natural inclination to draw connections and want to understand our world. But I also think it's something where it allows people to, because so many of us, know at least a little bit about astrology, so if a reader is saying like, oh, there's a lot of Aries energy here and you're in Aries, or you have a lot of Aries energy, you might be like, oh, you might connect to it more.
Right.
But I think it can also, get in the way of things, because if someone's resonating with a message and, I bring up like, oh, it looks like there's Pisces energy here, and they're like, oh, well, then the message isn't for me because I'm not asking about a Pisces. It's like, well, no, that's not the point. It shouldn't take away from that. I think it's a great thing that can add confirmation, but astrology itself is so dense, so fascinating, and
it's also kind of longer form readings, whereas tarot is more of a short form kind of ad lib experience on the fly kind of thing, whereas I would see like an astrology birth chart or something, this is really thought out and presented.
Oh yeah, but even then, the readers that have it, they channel the same way like I do and you can just see it, like they flow, and there's just like they just have the gift, like it's a really beautiful thing. And even like every astrologer, they're so different, but they still convey the messages that they need to. And I think it itself is its own very dense, very incredible practice. And I would say there's a lot more nuance there even than in tarot and card reading. So yeah, it's kind of hard to like, it's kind of one of those things that's more of like I would say a surface level connection than like a deep one, but maybe that's also because I haven't gone deep enough with it yet to see it beyond the surface level. So that could just be a me thing.
So I hear you talk about the Rider-Waite deck a lot. What exactly is that? The kind of tarot deck that we're all kind of mostly familiar with when you see tarot images? That's like your standard deck.
So the Rider-Waite deck was published in 1911, and that deck, that Rider-Waite structure, is the most common deck structure that you see. Like when people make their own tarot decks, they usually are following the Rider-Waite structure.
And by the structure, do you mean just the suits, the cards, the court cards?
The design, because I think before then, there had been like there's been cards for their specific purposes. I know, like I'm thinking of Tarochi or something like that. Like when what you were saying earlier, like the history of tarot goes back very far, and it seems like its purposes were used differently back then. But the Rider-Waite tarot was published in 1911 and created by, I believe, Arthur Waite and somebody else. My tarot history is not great.
I'm going to guess somebody named Rider.
Yeah, maybe.
I don't know.
Who knows?
Right. It's lost.
But it definitely, I would say, became the standardized version of a tarot deck. And like that's the first tarot deck that I ever got. So yeah, it definitely, I would say, is the most common.
It's probably the images on them are very clear and easy to kind of understand, and everything on there seems to have a real purpose.
Yeah, it's very streamlined and it makes sense, and it's very closely entwined with like how you would view a deck of cards. Like, you've got your Jack, your Queen, your King. You've got a more expanded version of, the court cards. You've got an expanded version of, you know, the number cards, and then you have the major arcana, which are their own unique things. So like you can actually use a deck of cards to read with. You just don't have the major cards because there's only what
Oh, you mean like
52,
a deck of
56.
playing
So
cards?
you
You
like
could
a deck
actually
of
just.
playing cards, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So there's even similarities there.
Do you take a deck of tarot cards with you everywhere you go?
Um, sometimes there are times where I don't want to read to people. Like I'm just like I'm
Well, I
like I
bet
do this
now
all the
everybody who
time.
knows you is like, do me a reading, do a reading for me.
You know, actually, no, I will say, like, the people that are close to me are incredibly respectful. And like
Yeah, that would be.
oftentimes I'm the one offering and they're like, "Oh, well, I don't want to." And I'm like, "No, I want to. Like, let me."
That's pretty
I
cool.
I find that it's usually like when I'm, you know, out in public and like someone I barely know, you know, knows that I read and they want me to read for them or something like that. I'm like, one, I would, but, you know, you may not like what comes out. Like, because oftentimes I think people, you know, want to hear something, and oftentimes what they need to hear is not what they want to hear. And I
Something
don't know
different.
if I
Yeah.
want to be that messenger because I'm not going to
Right.
feed you lies. Like,
Well, I guess
I'm going to tell you the truth.
that also kind of begs the question: what are there like kind of standardized ethics as far as readers go, and confidentiality, and what kind of information are you willing to reveal, and what kind of information you're not willing?
Well, that's the thing is there isn't a standardized version of ethics, and I think
Yeah.
that that is a blessing and a curse because in a
Hmm.
lot of ways, you know, ethics are incredibly important. They keep people safe, and you know, they put in necessary boundaries so that, you know, we don't create more harm. For me, because, you know, I studied in research labs, I am familiar with the academic world, even though I certainly don't miss it. I do think that it taught me well in terms of looking at these things from, you know, an ethical lens. Like I don't do medical readings, I don't do legal readings. There are doctors and lawyers for those reasons. Please go see them. Like I think that a lot of times people do ask readers to cross boundaries that we wouldn't necessarily do ourselves, and they may not even realize that they're asking, you know, for boundaries to be crossed. But I do think that, you know, it is very important if you are a reader to really ask yourself, you know, what are your boundaries and what are your ethics? And I like, you know, I have ethics around, you know, for example, doing readings that are feeding on people's like hopes and dreams and like, you know, that's like future promising or something like that, rather than talking about, you know, nothing is saying that you can't have a beautiful future, but it's going to be a lot harder to get there if you're not sure how you and your present is creating that future impact.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that there are a lot of people that don't really stop to think about the ethics of this stuff because a lot of people that are drawn to these worlds are not necessarily as drawn to the sciencey, more academic-y worlds. And that's okay. But I think that, you know, my background in academia has helped me a little bit, at least in just how I look at the cards and how I conduct myself with them. But yeah, there definitely isn't a standardized practice. And there are certainly things that I don't approve of personally that I will never do that I see other people do. But like that's
Like what?
their
What would that be?
I don't want to put people on
Let's
blast.
throw them under the bus.
I I am gonna be cautious about that.
I get it. I get it.
I would just say, you know, there are more effective ways of using tarot than others, and I think that sometimes people can get, you know, just caught up in. Uh, I'm just gonna leave it there. People can just get caught up, you know, and I
Fair
think a
enough.
lot of it is innocent. I think a lot of it is innocent, and it's not inherently malicious. I think it's
Sure.
just naivety and yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about your YouTube videos. These crazy long YouTube videos. It's
Yeah.
6.5 hours. It's shit. That's a long video for YouTube.
Yeah, that took me
I
2
mean,
months to make.
that's a lot of editing. It's a lot of upload time. The file size must have been massive on that thing.
Oh, well,
These are the
see,
things I think of.
that's kind of one of the benefits is that there's not a whole lot of editing because it's full stream of consciousness. The hardest part of my readings to film are my intros because I have to think about what I'm
Yeah.
saying.
They're really detailed. That had a real detailed intro because you've got a kind of like whole list of points, page after page of points that you want to cover in them. And so, describe what your videos are like because they are readings, but obviously for a lot of people, they're I guess the opposite of a personal reading. How are people benefiting from a general reading like that? Because I read through your comments and you're reaching people. I mean, you have a very engaged
I have an incredible
audience.
audience.
They're really, I mean, more so than any other video. I see hundreds of comments on your videos from people, and they're all kind of saying the same thing. Like, you've reached me on this. This is really important. You're really affecting my life. And I think that's really important.
Well, I am very passionate about accessibility and accessibility to quality things for free. I grew up in a very impoverished place and I saw firsthand, um, how that impacts, people's opportunities and how, it impacts your accessibility to resources in the world. And there's partially part of me, like with my readings, I felt very uncomfortable even putting a price on them and doing personal readings. So I found it to be a very powerful way for me to get quality readings for free and then not have this guilt of charging for this thing and not
Right.
knowing if I'm, helping. And what I've really come to realize about them as I've done them is that, they serve a very powerful purpose because one, they remind people that they're not alone. Like if thousands of people are resonating with one message, even though you may not interact with these people or know who they are, but there are people all over the world going through and feeling the exact same things as you are. The semantics of your lived experiences, like where you live and what your culture is maybe different, but the underlying like feelings and experience of that is universal. I also have found that, imagine if I had to give that same message that took me an hour and a half to channel individually to every single person. That would take me a whole lot longer. And I think that personal readings are great because it is great to have a one-on-one connection. It is great to know that a message is just for you. But I also think that, that can be pricey. You can take a risk and not know if the person you're buying the reading from is going to work for you. And I think it's one of those powerful things where you can step into this world of tarot without having to give up your hard-earned dollars and taking that risk first. But also, you know, I found that it's even more than just like readings. Like, a lot of people say they watch my videos to go to sleep, which is like the nicest thing ever. Like, I'm like, thank
Yeah.
you.
Well,
And
you're like really good at just, it's a monologue. It's incredible that you could talk straight alone like that for that length of time. I mean, I get tongue tied just trying to say a single sentence.
I think it's because it's not my words. It's the words of something much greater than, and I'm just kind of, letting them flow through me. And, I got two brain cells like in my normal day-to-day life. And it's oftentimes when I'm sitting here and doing those readings that I'm like, just floored by what's coming through, because oftentimes there will be something that I need to hear or I'll get insight that I'll be like, oh wow, that makes so much sense. Like oftentimes I'm just as much of a participant as the person watching,
Hmm.
and I'm even shocked as things are happening. And it's really one of those things where it's cool to see how I'm connected to so many people, and
Yeah.
and that, we all are connected. And, it's really easy to look at how we're all different and how we're separate, but we don't often look enough at how we all are connected and we all are going through this, our own unique human experiences. But, there is a lot of uh, mutual resonance with those
Yeah.
experiences. And I think collective readings shine a light on that.
And plus, they're funny. I think at parts of it, yeah, yeah. There's some really funny
Thanks.
moments in a lot of those.
I think that's just my personality.
Yeah,
It's not everyone's cup of tea, but if you are gonna get a reading from me, you're gonna have to deal with my personality. Sorry.
it looks like the format on most of them is that you have 4 decks to choose from. So people watching the video, that you'll have an intro, and then they get to choose kind of which deck just resonates with them. And then
Yeah.
then then you can skip to that part of the video to get that personal reading based on just however the viewer kind of is responding to a deck. And you also will include like yeah, you should actually talk about crystals, because you use like a crystals on
Yeah.
top of the decks, and how does that play in?
Yeah. So I like to put crystals and decks together, and I use those as the um the method of picking which reading is for you. So, if I have a reading that is, let's say 2024 predictions, I say is I'm like, I'm not doing predictions. I do them sometimes, just not all the time. And I've stopped doing them monthly because I got tired of doing that all the time. 30 days is not a long time. So there are going to be 4 separate readings, but they're all based on that topic. So you're meant to pick based on what you feel drawn towards. Now, people are drawn to things for different reasons. So one thing that I tried to do to help people is oftentimes I'll do something called like an energy check in the beginning of the reading. And I'll say, okay, if you resonate with this energy that I'm describing, then the rest of the reading is going to be for you. If you don't, then I would try a different pile. I don't do that for every reading. And I do think sometimes I spoil my audience a little bit with that, but I'd love to. And I think it's very important to have as much confirmation as possible, especially in a collective reading, because, you know, there are a lot of people watching it, and it is important to affirm what is meant for you and what isn't, because I think sometimes it's very easy to hold on to what someone outside of you is saying and negate your own truth. So I think that's kind of an important part of it. But yeah, I like to use pretty crystal and like deck combinations just because that's something that brings me joy, and I like them to be visually appealing. And that's just part of the fun creative process for me. And I think one of the cool things too is that, like, you know, I often will have people pick the tarot deck, and, you know, there will be unique insights in that deck specifically that we wouldn't have gotten if we used a different deck. So it's really cool even just to see like the nuances within different decks. And yeah, so they pick which stone or which pile they feel most drawn to, and then there's a timestamp in the comment section, and then they can just click to their reading. So even though that video is six and a half hours, the one I just uploaded, you're not supposed to sit there and watch all 6.5 hours of it unless you want to watch all those readings. So, you know, sometimes
I would
people
love to see
complain about that.
I'd love to see your analytics. You must have like these spikes all over, you know, about
Yeah,
more
I do.
people and
And
the
it,
watch
like,
time. But your watch time's got to be through the roof. I mean, it's pretty good. I mean, I think that you're doing pretty well on those long videos.
well, you know, I would hope so, because I can't help myself. I'm not trying to make videos this long. It's just that, like, I can't stop until
Do
it's
you find it
done.
hard to find an ending to each of the readings when you're just like reading and reading? Because those could be, you know, over an hour long
And well, that's the thing, is it's one of
per
those things where
pile.
it's like, yeah, it's a lot, and I've gotten a lot better at taking care of myself in between, because channeling is no joke. It really, it takes a lot on your energy. But it's, what was the question? I just got lost.
You know what? I want to know about how many decks of cards do you have?
Oh,
You don't
I
even
don't
know.
know. I don't want to know. I don't want to know. Like, I have a lot.
Do you have a
Too
favorite?
many.
Do you have a favorite deck?
That's like, I would say I have like a varsity team, like, of just like, of my heavy hitters that I prefer.
Well, the ones you
Um,
feature on your channel, looks like there's different ones all the time, and they're just beautiful. I love the artwork on tarot decks.
and that's on the incredible creators that make these decks. Like,
Yeah.
I really love using indie decks. I have a lot of indie decks that I use, and, you know, it is the coolest thing in the world to have like a someone who has created a tarot deck like comment on my video and be like, "Oh my gosh, you're using my deck." I'm like, "Oh my gosh, you're commenting on my video." Like, it's so cool. Like, thanks for making this incredible thing. And I love, you know, just the variety that comes from, you know, people's artistic interpretations. And, you know, they all work, and they all are so special in their own ways.
Yeah.
And I think it's just one of those things where, like, if you appreciate art, you should appreciate tarot cards. There's a lot of art
Absolutely.
and a lot of finesse that goes into it that I don't think tarot creators get enough credit for.
Yeah, I mean that was really my first exposure with tarot. Was I was for many years I've just been really fascinated by the artwork in tarot decks, and so yeah, it's definitely worth checking out if you like art.
Yeah,
How's
people
the
are talented.
how's the YouTube experience been for you? So you just been started since 2020, so you picked a good time to start on YouTube with everybody sitting at
Yeah.
home.
Well, I mean, I kind of always, like, I don't know why. It sounds weird saying it, but I kind of always knew I was gonna, like, I was a viewer for a really long time. I just never had anything to say. And then when I found tarot, like, you know, the wheels kind of started turning. But it's definitely a very unique experience, because I think typically you're like, while every creator, I would hope, puts their heart and soul into what they make, there's an extra soulfulness to doing spirit work on a digital platform. It's a very paradoxical thing where it's like the most egoic thing in existence, and then you're doing something very meaningful and soulful and vulnerable. But it's really cool because it's been a unique gift in the sense that, one, it allows me to do it for a living. It also allows me to connect with people all over the world. I've met some of my best friends through doing this, and it definitely messes with your psyche. And if you are a people pleaser and you want to stop being a people pleaser, get a public platform, because you will have to let go of that. It's like putting your hand on a hot stove every single day and just having to accept that you're going to disappoint people no matter what you do.
I can attest to that after 15 years. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and it's one of those interesting things because, when you're a viewer of someone, you have more of a unique relationship to their content. And you don't really understand the creator side until you're on the creator side.
Yeah, well, there's definitely that parasocial relationship there. Yeah.
Well, and it's even more intense because I feel the people I read for. I feel their pain. I feel their excitement. I live their experiences when I sit down and read for them. And so it's one of those things where they're not a number. Like, they are a human being. And I think that's actually probably something that makes, being ethical easier, because there is no detachment from the awareness of, like, these are real people with real lives, and I need to treat that with compassion and care, like, because I would anyway. But I think that when you become a creator, it can be very easy to become detached and want to remove yourself. And it's kind of one of those hard things where it's like, how much can I connect without leaving myself vulnerable to a lot of negativity? The way that I kind of view it is like, if there are 500 people lined up in front of you and 95% of them are going to give you, like, the biggest, warmest hug of your life, but 5% of them are going to punch you in the face as hard as they can. Like, it's going to be hard for you to be open and embrace everyone, because they're like, are you going to punch me in the face?
You're always guarded,
I don't. Yeah. And it's one of those things where, I think when you're on the viewer side, you're like, well, you get so much love. Like, you get, like, just, and it's like, yes. And I'm so grateful for that. But that doesn't negate, like, the painful experience of, like, just people being cruel and kind of dehumanizing you. And, I'm kind of coming to,
because I've kind of come to believe that a lot of those kind of negative comments are just really amounts to just, like, abusive behavior. Is really what it is.
You're actually the only other person I've ever talked to that talked about it in the framework of abuse, because it is abuse. There's a lot of abusive behavior on the internet that, ironically, I think is coming from people who themselves have experienced that and are, wounded and don't have an outlet for healing. And so they just regurgitate what they have been given. And that is, such a sad thing. And I think there's a part of me that is sad when I encounter that, because I want to be able to help them. And knowing that I can't makes me sad. And it makes me sad that they're in that place and that this is where we're at. But it's also something where it has empowered me so much to realize, like, what is worth worrying about and what isn't, and what is my responsibility and what isn't. Because people in these fields of giving, it can be hard for us to know when to stop. And it can be hard for us to, place our boundaries and remind ourselves, like, what our responsibilities really are. And I think, the powerful thing about being a creator and having so many eyes on you is you have to define who you are to yourself, and you have to be confident in that and continue to redefine that as you grow. And you just kind of, like, you surrender to this truth that you can't make everyone happy, but it's a cool and beautiful experience to at least bring joy to the ones that do benefit from it. And
well, it sounds like you're trying to find that balance, because you're very early in a YouTube career, only 3 years in. So, and with such a large following so quickly, I think you've managed to balance that out pretty well. Do you read all of your comments?
I wish I could, but
you get a lot. You get a shit ton of comments.
Yeah, I'm very grateful. I definitely, when I, like, first started out, it was, like, very wild, just, like, having those eyes on me and, like, people caring, like like people used to not care what I had to say. People didn't care what I thought, or so just like even people seeing me and acknowledging me, like, yeah,
Yeah.
like your ego is like, oh wow, this is you. Like you want to explore that, and I think it's a very natural and common thing when you first start out to kind of be looking at that. And I guess just one thing I've realized is that the comment section is a wonderful place to visit, but not a good place to stay. I think
Yeah,
that
that's a good way of
it's
putting it.
yeah, no, dip your
Yeah.
toes in,
I
and because
always
I think
find
it
that, like, if you can jump in, like, after posting a video in the first hour or so, because those are, like, the really passionate people that are really there, and they really love what you do,
yes.
and I kind of, like,
My
feel like
notification squad, I shout out to my
yeah.
notification squad. They, if I usually look at people who first comment when I upload, and then I'll come back in sporadically and just kind of see what's going on. What's cool is that sometimes like I will just click on like my YouTube app, and then there will be a comment. You know how like it shows like the first three.
Yeah,
There will
yeah.
be a comment, and it'll be related to something that I needed to hear, or like a weird
Mm,
sign that I needed to know. And so it's wild how like we can be, sources of guidance for each other without even realizing it. And,
sure.
there's often so much like powerful stuff in my comment section, especially like everyone is so kind to each other. And, there's always so much kindness and support and wisdom shared there. I try my best to be in a place where I can always be open and receptive to taking a walk in there, because there's always wonderful things in there. I think it's
Yeah.
just not a place to visit if you're not in a great headspace.
Do you ever consider insuring your hands?
I
I mean,
haven't.
if your hands get crushed in a car door or something, man, because you're like on 4 hour video of nothing but your hands.
I mean, well, I guess that's the thing. I guess I'll just have to pay someone to be my hands, and I'll just
Oh, maybe that
listen.
would
You
be
can
it.
you can
No,
crush my hands, but you can't crush my
you
voice.
can't get.
Yeah, listen, I will find a way.
Well, see now, see all of your manicures and everything is all tax deductible now too, of
It
course.
is. Well, you know what's so crazy is I've always loved getting my nails done, and when I was in high school, I was like, "Oh, I hope I can have a job one day where I can still have fun nails," and so now it's, like, really cool, like, how that lined up, because
Yeah.
having nails like that is just always something I've enjoyed. It's not because of the reading thing, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Do you have any intentions for the new year coming up? I guess regarding your channel, regarding your business, regarding all of this?
I think my intentions are honestly to just show up more. I've
Mm.
definitely been, if I'm being honest, the growth of my channel is something that I was not anticipating, and going from like, just being a person to all of a sudden having so many eyes on me, and I'm also just like a person going through my own like developmental experiences. Like I just turned 25 a couple months ago. Like my brain is like just starting to like develop, and like I feel like I'm finally becoming an adult, and there's just a lot of like weird fear and hesitation of showing up and being seen. And I feel like a lot of these past few years have been me finding my footing, and understanding like what is my role, and things like ethics. Like I care so much about not putting something out that's going to add to harm, or unintentionally lead people astray. And so I think because of that, hyper like that hyper fixation and like that
Yeah.
hyper awareness, it's been very hard for me to share myself outside of just my readings in general, and my readings alone, because I just there's a lot of self criticism, or almost like uh threat monitoring happening when I'm reading, just because of like the experience of knowing what other people might say, or like
I mean,
the
you're really
things.
putting yourself out there.
Yeah, and so I think it's just kind of one of those things where I've been working a lot in the background on deepening my like spiritual side, on building my confidence, my self-esteem, and really just stepping into myself so that I can show up, and I can show up in an authentic and an aligned way, because I
Yeah.
think that YouTube can create a lot of pressure to constantly show up and constantly be giving, and I think that that leads to a lot of self-destruction and burnout and behaviors that don't actually align with the creator's true intentions. So I feel
Sure.
like I've been just trying, like my goal this year is definitely to just expand upon what I'm doing, help even more, and show up more, and just be able to do more.
Well, I think you're helping a lot of people. It's apparent by what you're doing on YouTube. Do you have any last words before we go? What do you want people to know about tarot?
I just want people to know that, you know, tarot is there if they want to explore that relationship, that they don't have to. But I guess this is less about tarot and more just that there is so much more to this world than we realize. And the more that I learn, the more that I realize I know nothing. And, if your life is miserable, if your life is full of bitterness or resentment, you know, I see you, I feel you, but really don't accept that as the whole case, because there's so much more to this world. And I think that, tarot, like anything else, can be a gateway into a new opportunity of understanding and for a new way of living. And I just ultimately I just want people to live a life that they enjoy. Life is hard. We all deserve to do things that make us feel good and that make us feel alive and make us feel human. So whether it's tarot or something else, like, don't give up on trying to find that.
Madison, it was great talking to you. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.